Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to our keynote for day 2 of our CLC conference. We'll be getting started in just a moment, but welcome. Revitalizing our schools and community. Partnerships and collaboration in disadvantaged areas. Thank you very much for joining us. So seeing that it's 9:15, let's get started. So my name is Ben Loomer, and I'm a member of the provincial resource team at Learn on the CLC project. And I'd like to share with you a few thoughts about the session that we're going to be embarking on for the next hour and hour and a half or so. So equity for students is a theme that runs through the conference today. In preparation for the conference, the planning committee reflected that CLC schools and partners need to shift from addressing poverty and disadvantaged communities with short-term supports like Christmas baskets towards longer-term supports that are more holistic. But part of this equity work is also reflecting on our personal bias and the work of schools to be inclusive of all students and families to experience success. So what I find interesting about this topic is that it doesn't just engage the intellect, but rather benefits from the connection of the head and the heart. And using the arts is one of the best ways that I know to do this. So to start off with, I'd like to play a spoken word piece written especially for this session by Rowan Higgins, an educator and spoken word artist. And we're going to be seeing Rowan again on day 3 as she leads us through a sense-making session. This session will connect many of the strands and untangle some of the knots that form when so much good information over 3 days gets presented in a relatively short time. So I want to share with you a wonderful spoken word piece to start us off.
That's the question.
So Ben, if you can just move any.
I remember being in kindergarten, sitting with my peers on a red circular carpet. The teacher asked us the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I remember everyone's excitement, hands outstretched, reaching towards the sky with eagerness. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor. The teacher smiled and said, wow, that's amazing, and ended our circle time with, what you believe you can achieve. As I became older, it was obvious that they couldn't see me. And the reality of success did not come from the motivational posters hanging on the classroom walls. Because fact is, between my many walls of influence of my school experiences, I watched how they celebrated the students who succeeded with stickers and praise. And when the term was over, I received a most improved certificate in a sealed envelope of great effort remarks or with a pat on the back. I knew they just didn't want me to feel bad. I remember the awes and you poor thing painted on my educators' faces as they somehow knew my home situation or made assumptions that my parents didn't care because they were never there and did not show up to meet the teachers or missed my activities. Even though truth is, they were working and had to take care of my younger siblings. So, people would ease up on me and not have many expectations and give me light work to pass the time. No longer challenging me or gave me more time to do work without the actual support. And sometimes they would just be so hard on me and remind me that I was a nuisance and an outcast. So everyone just thought I was dumb when they would call me out of class to get that extra help. When I look back, no one had any Ivy League dreams for me or did my homework for me because I was tired coming from Little League or paid for my SATs. No one was there to help me with my assignments or help me get the right tools to create a cool science project. I just never got the resources to be great. A tutor to help me break things down, a listening ear to practice my oral presentation. What I do remember learning is that there was this huge assumption that I was going to struggle. If they can actually just put that belief that I can achieve in action, I would have believed that I can actually achieve. If they changed their approach and spoke to me like they did with my peers, I wouldn't feel like I was so different. So I want to share with you what I wish I could have told those who held the power for me to succeed. My access to learning comes from the sources around me. My intelligence has to be constantly recalibrated like the smart board in those classrooms, where you pause and realize it's not working to its best capacity, and you have to connect it again or even do it differently. Just like my peers, my learning is affected by my situation, my status, influence, and the lack of access to opportunity. But more so, it's how you see me. Your belief about me will affect your very practices and even how you engage and interact with me. So please, for the sake of every other child coming behind me, lead with the understanding that we can achieve based on what you believe.
Wasn't that great? So the Ministry of Education's revitalization plan for educational success reinforces the role of parents and family as being at the heart of a student's educational success in school. The support of families, their attitude, and their expectations have an impact on the student's ability to achieve success. Understanding this, we have to ask the question, if the relationship between families and schools is so crucial to student success, from an equity perspective, how can we confront our bias or accept barriers to full participation, just because that is the way it's always been? How can schools, families, and community partners work together on a solution-focused approach? To help us understand this issue, we're pleased to welcome Nancy Salterelli. Nancy is a professional resource for A Montreal School for All, a Quebec Ministry of Education program supporting interventions in disadvantaged communities. Nancy started her career as an elementary school teacher with the English Montreal School Board, and she was also head teacher of a summer school program for more than 15 years. She has experience working with Sun Youth, a well-known community partner in Montreal, known, at least by me, for its awesome tackle football program that practices not far from my house. And for Nancy, her first link to Sun Youth was a youth camp that initially sparked her passion for working with students from disadvantaged communities. Through this experience, she believes all children can learn and succeed in the right environment, and that schools play a key role in this success. So I'd like to offer a warm CLC welcome to Nancy as she shares with us her knowledge and message. Take it away, Nancy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How do I follow Rowan? She's just amazing. I feel like she captured in 4 minutes what it's going to take me 25 minutes or so to try to get across. So I will do my best. So I will just share my presentation. Ben, do you see? Perfect.
Looks great.
Great, great, great. Okay. I'm just going to move everybody. Great. So good morning again. I am so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you for that introduction. As Ben mentioned, I'm not currently in a classroom, but I am an elementary teacher from the English Montreal School Board, a very proud one. And before I began my teaching career, I did spend 10 summers working at Sun Youth Sleepaway Camp in the Laurentians. I also worked at their head office during Christmas time, helping to coordinate food basket pickups. And I continue to be involved with the organization in various ways. Primarily, it's because it's where I met my husband, and it's still his full-time job. So my personal life experience has allowed me to know firsthand the impact that community partnerships can have on schools, on families, and on students, particularly from disadvantaged areas. The schools I worked at were both in disadvantaged areas of the city. So as a teacher, I was able to use my connection to Sun Youth organization to help our students and their families, but also to look for ways for us to help the organization. And then 5 years ago, I was given the opportunity to work as a professional resource at a Montreal School for All. And even though I felt tremendous guilt leaving my school and my classroom, this job really blends two of my passions, which are education and advocating for students from disadvantaged areas. So our program, a Montreal School for All, or Une École Montréalaise pour tous, as it's more commonly recognized, is a ministry program co-managed by the MEQ and the 5 island school boards and service centers. Our mission is to contribute to the educational success of students from Montreal's disadvantaged communities. We offer support to selected schools in many forms, including professional development and artistic and cultural practices. And all of our actions are guided in the values of equality, equity, and social justice. The need for a program like ours is due to the fact that gaps in achievement among students from different socioeconomic backgrounds remains an issue worth consideration, and the need to intervene remains crucial. Students from disadvantaged backgrounds are considered at greater academic risk than their peers, and students from more advantaged areas are more likely to succeed in school and 20% more likely to graduate. But why do these gaps exist? It's not because students from more advantaged areas have more cognitive abilities or aptitudes to learn. It's not because students from more advantaged areas are provided learning that is necessary at home. It's largely because students from more advantaged areas have had more opportunities and come from a culture that closely resembles that of our school system, placing them at an advantage right from the very start. We can all agree not every student has been given the same opportunities in life. Every opportunity is an advantage, and every advantage gets you a head start. If you speak the language, if your parents did well in school, if you've participated in many activities, if you've been exposed to literature, arts, and culture, if you know how to navigate the school system, if you know what is expected of you and how to behave. And the more of these advantages you have, the more of a head start you get. Conversely, for students who haven't been given those same opportunities, we might think they're lacking abilities preventing academic success, when maybe there are things lacking in our system and our schools impeding it. This is due, at least in part, to a misunderstanding of the complexity of poverty and disadvantage. Peter Townsend pioneered a relative deprivation approach to poverty. Basically, he said poverty and wealth are relative terms. You are poor or wealthy in relation to something or someone. And that when you're deprived of income, you are also deprived of other living standards that the majority of the people in the society to which you belong enjoy. His definition of deprivation covered a wide range of aspects of living standards that were both material and social. So not just being deprived of food and clothing, but also the social aspects of living that most of the people in your wider community partake in and benefit from. This places some individuals and families at a disadvantage compared to others, which is why we refer to the socioeconomic status of families. If we take Montreal, for example, this map is designed to measure the scope of both social and economic inequality on the island. The overall underprivileged index is composed of 4 variables: family income, mother's education, single parent female-led families, and parents' employment status. These are the variables considered to have a significant influence on education. But as we can see, family income makes up only a portion of this calculation. That is why in education, we use the term disadvantaged areas and not poor areas, because poverty manifests into many aspects of someone's life. Therefore, intervening on the aspect of poverty alone doesn't address the equity and social justice implications of being disadvantaged that impact school success. And although the impact on education of these four variables is significant, as the research says, it's not on a child's ability to learn. And the reason why intervention in disadvantaged areas is so complex is primarily because no two communities we encounter are alike. And even more so, no two families we encounter are alike. Factors such as isolation and unemployment, for example, might be compounded by food insecurity, a lack of computer equipment, or internet access. And for many families, there are communication barriers. You can be well educated and still be disadvantaged, especially if you come from another country and you don't understand how to navigate the school system in Quebec. Comparatively, you could be financially disadvantaged, but understand what schools expect and know what and how to respond to those expectations effectively. However, you may struggle to find and keep employment and juggle family and work life, especially if you're a single parent. In addition to financial struggles, you may be isolated in your community and not have a network of friends or family to support you. You may be working more than one job to make ends meet and be away from your children for long periods of time. You may have had a poor relationship with school and learning growing up and have a mistrust of the education system. There isn't one way to be disadvantaged by circumstance or to be disadvantaged by policies and practices that are far from someone's experience or values. And all of these can have an impact on your journey through school. Every circumstance is unique and deserves consideration, compassion, and understanding. And therefore, intervention for success of each student does not have a one-size-fits-all approach. This is even truer when we consider our entire province. Think about how people experience poverty and disadvantage so differently from one city to another, from urban to rural areas, from southern to northern Quebec. Think about the advantages that some of the families have over others in the schools that you work with. Many of you already work to reduce barriers related to poverty, food, clothing, financial aid. But let's also consider the aspects of disadvantage and discrimination that our families are facing. Moving to online learning during the pandemic was a perfect example of this. Only addressing poverty means surveying who needs a device, providing one, and assuming we've leveled the playing field. And although it's definitely a start, addressing the possible disadvantages means considering the number of devices versus the number of users in a home, the types of devices, access to the internet, the speed, limited or unlimited, data from a home plan versus data from a phone plan. It means considering what it means to have access. Does having a device mean that I have the digital literacy and technological understanding to use it effectively? And if I don't, in what way might I be disadvantaged compared to more educated or digitally literate groups? When we turn our attention to that, the disadvantages our families often face due to poverty, it shifts how we think about intervention from one of equality to one of equity. Not just giving everybody the same, but giving everybody what they need to succeed. In doing so, we consider everyone's point of view and everyone's reality. But an important first step is to recognize that we have beliefs about people experiencing poverty that affect how we see our students and their families. My experiences taught me that I had to confront my own stereotypes and assumptions. Students from disadvantaged areas are often considered weak before they've even started school, but poverty is not a learning disability. Not knowing something doesn't make you weak. If I've never ridden a bike, I can't be considered a weak bike rider. I've just never done it. Unfortunately, our unconscious attitudes and stereotypes take over, and we might falsely judge and make wrong assumptions. Think about when parents miss opportunities to be present in school. We might unintentionally misjudge a parent who may not have the means to get to school or who's working a night shift, but didn't return the form and explain the situation, compared to a parent who sends an email to explain that they can't be present because they're on a business trip. They both miss the same event, but our perception of the absence can be unfairly different. And because it's often a hot topic, let's talk a moment about parents not being present in school and how that can translate into us believing that they're not engaged in their child's education or that they don't value school and learning. But do I have to be present to be engaged? Whose value system are we basing our judgments on? The school I worked at for many years had a large Sri Lankan population, and I remember a parent telling me once that her not coming to school was a sign of respect and trust that we, the school, were doing our job correctly. I had made assumptions about their absence that was completely false, and I realized in that moment I needed to judge less and listen more. We perceive situations, make assumptions, and draw conclusions very differently from one neighborhood to another and one family to another, and it affects our beliefs about how and why students from disadvantaged areas are less likely to succeed. But the research shows that there are schools in disadvantaged areas with high academic results, and what all those schools have in common are the following characteristics. Not surprising to all of you here, a relationship with parents and a partnership with the community are among those key factors. So we're going to take a closer look at just those two characteristics. As a teacher working in disadvantaged areas, I worked as hard building relationships with the parents as I did with building them with my students. I participated in governing boards and other school events as a way to get to know the parents that were involved in those aspects of school life. I invited parents to anything and anything I could think of, in-class activities, field trips, even if I didn't need them for supervision. It was a great way to get to know parents and grandparents who were available during the day. I always made sure to have a show or a presentation on a school night at least once a year, where parents were invited to watch their child perform or present some fabulous work. Every parent loves to see their child shine, and it was an opportunity for other family members to come as well, older and younger siblings, for example. And I always invited students to parent-teacher evenings with their parents. It allowed me to tell them how wonderful their child was, first off, and it allowed my students to share their work and their growth and progress. And we discussed learning goals all together. It was great to have the students translate when communication was a factor, but it was that message that we're all in this together and that the child is part of that partnership. In 20 plus years, I have never met a parent who didn't love hearing wonderful things about their child or who didn't appreciate someone who knew and loved their child almost as much as they did, no matter what socioeconomic or cultural background they came from, ever. I think the key elements to this component in high-performing schools is the equal partnership that is established, as well as the variety and diversity of their participation in school life. It's not the school team that decides which ways count as involvement. And I think our school daycares can really help with forming relationships with parents, because they often have that privilege of seeing parents or guardians face to face at the beginning or at the end of the day, sometimes both. And collaborating with school daycare teams is a great way to know our families better and to be able to reach out to them. Most of my students took the bus or went to daycare after school. If I hadn't found other ways to connect with parents, I most likely would never have seen them. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here when I share with you the importance of community partnerships, But it's even more important in a disadvantaged area to get to know the neighborhood to which our schools and our students belong, the community centers, the cultural affiliations, their customs, traditions, beliefs. Where are our students when they're not in school? Where has trust already been established? That's a great place to start. What sports teams are they on? Who are their coaches? What religious or cultural associations do they belong to? They will help us better understand our families, their point of view, and their realities. Collaborating with organizations that are already in touch with our families could give us insights on how to better serve and reach out to them. In high-performing schools, the responsibility is shared with both parents and the community. Each is part of the solution, not part of the problem. Ultimately, the goal is to reach all families, especially those we haven't been able to reach, those with lower literacy skills and families who don't speak the school language, or who perhaps they themselves had a negative experience with school. And we can accomplish this by recognizing and taking into account people's realities and using an equity lens to help us identify potential impacts, blind spots, and stereotypes so that we can try to eliminate barriers and better serve our families, giving them all an opportunity to participate. An equity lens changes the questions that we ask ourselves when we plan, develop, or evaluate policies or programs, or even events and activities. First off, how are we communicating with our families? Is it effective? Are we reaching every family? Do we know if we're reaching every family? Are we only using letters and emails to reach them, or is it varied? Is it translated if necessary? Are we making an effort to have face-to-face conversations whenever possible? In what ways are we promoting a form of communication that goes both ways? Do families feel comfortable communicating with at least one member of our school team? What about our collaboration practices? Are we collaborating effectively with our families? Are parents equal partners? How do we perceive our parents? As part of the problem or part of the solution? Do we focus on what they're missing or what strengths and skills they have? For what they do or for what they don't do? As poor or disadvantaged? What do we know about the realities and point of view of our families? And who is most likely and least likely benefiting from our collaborations? These are just examples to illustrate that using an equity lens allows us to keep our assumptions and biases in check and consider the diverse needs and realities of our families so that we can be deliberately inclusive. Because effective family school community partnerships and collaborations support student achievement and impacts retention, thus reducing the achievement gap among students from various socioeconomic backgrounds. Ultimately, it's why you do what you do, and what you do makes a huge difference. Your work, especially in disadvantaged areas, creates better community engagement, which leads to improved student learning, stronger families, and healthier communities. See, some students will succeed in spite of effective partnerships and collaborations, but students in disadvantaged areas will succeed because of them. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Nancy, for this wonderful and I guess insightful conversation or presentation that really kick off many of the different topics that we've been discussing over the last day and will continue to discuss over the next few days. So what we have now is a bit of time for a question and answer period. We'd love to have you pose any questions to Nancy that she could share her insights on, as well. If you have any stories or examples of partnerships or ways you've collaborated with families, this is something we'd love to hear as well. And just So, you know, after about 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to move into some breakout groups where we have some questions that we invite some small group conversations with. So with that, I'd love to open up the space for some questions. I invite you to raise your hand in the Zoom space or write it in the chat and we can pose it from there. Thank you. So I'll start with David. David, you have a question. As you search for your microphone. David Paperno. David P, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't allowed to unmute myself, but I think everything's all good. Thank you, Ben. Hi, Nancy.
Hi.
I just a question. I was wondering when you're talking about the low literacy rates, through an equity lens, what are some good strategies to help improve those literacy rates?
For students?
Yes.
I think it's the approach when we put into place equitable classroom practices. So I was saying, like, a lot of students are considered weak before they've even started school because we have these set expectations of what students should come to school already knowing. And the bottom line is they don't need to come to school already knowing anything. And their relationship with literature, with books, with reading might be different than what we expect when they start school. But they have had many experiences. Like, they're just not, maybe they haven't sat and listened to a story, but maybe they've been told stories. And so we need to have high expectations of our students, but also recognize that background knowledge plays a key factor in their understanding. We need to put play and do all the things that maybe they didn't get the opportunity to do outside of school before they started school, but they're not empty vessels. Like, I just think the types of practices that we put into place and making sure that we expose them to rich, meaningful literature will set them up for success. So I just think it's the approaches that we use. Making sure that we're unloading their working memory and putting them into situations where they're fun and interacting with words and sounds and vocabulary.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to take a question from the chat now. And just as a bit of a pretext or preamble, Nancy and I were talking about the differences in the CLC network around rural and urban realities. So this is something that was on our mind. And I guess I'm very proud to let everybody know that Nicole Julian, who was a CDA with the Riverside School Board last year and for years previously, is Nancy's counterpart around rural disadvantaged areas. Nicole wasn't able to be with us today, but it was wonderful to kind of know that we can have these types of conversations as we continue. So I want to ask a question that came from Lynn, which is around transportation in rural areas and it always being a challenge. So, I mean, from your vantage point or your own experience, do you have any tips or advice around working around transportation as a barrier in disadvantaged areas?
So I find that it's amazing what you'll get when you ask. Like, we had in those situations, there were times we're able, and we're not in a rural area, so I understand that that's like a different aspect, but reaching out to people about a specific issue like that, transportation. We have event, and I don't know if this is what the question meant, but we have an event at school. There are families that would love to come, but they can't get there. Putting it out there, it's amazing what people are willing to do to help each other. Oh, I have a minivan. I can, do pickups that night or bring, like, I just think when it's something so specific, it's actually easier sometimes to just put it out there to the community, to community organizations, to their cultural, like I was saying before, like where are the kids already, or where are the families already, where's trust already established, and ask them if they can help with that particular issue. You know, sometimes community organizations have like buses or transportation that they already own, or somebody might be willing to pay for a school bus for a night event. And I don't know if that was the question, but
Well,
that's what I
just
would
jump in.
say is, yeah,
I mean, sorry to
no, not at all.
step on your words. I mean, that is a really powerful and important suggestion, which is part of the CLC approach. Who are the partners in our community that are able to help that? And I'll just note that Ruby from Sewer for Laurier School Board just offered some great suggestions around. I'll just read it. In order to have after-school activities in high school, we have an agreement with a local taxi company for $2 rides. Students from the same areas can get into the same taxi. And this is just, you know, and she goes on, you can read the note yourself, but the power of having those conversations and finding solutions. So thank you for that. I'll go to someone who wants to ask a question live, and Natalina, you have a question, comment.
Thank you, Ben. Nancy, thank you for your presentation and your obvious passion and how invested you are.
Thank you.
Nancy, autism is extremely prevalent. I won't get into all of those statistics, but April is Autism Awareness Month. I was wondering if you have an experience to share with us, again, through the equity lens, whether when you were in your role at a Montreal School for All or in your current role, in terms of working collaboratively with families of neurodiverse students and specifically those diagnosed with autism.
Yeah, I would say my experience with that comes more as a classroom teacher. And again, I think it's about trying to understand their realities. So we had families with students who are on the autism spectrum who didn't have the same access, I'll call it that, the same access to like the same access to, for example, working with Giant Steps, which is in our community, as families from more affluent areas. They didn't know all of the services that were available. Sometimes they weren't available in English if they were English speaking. So that was a barrier for them. And so what we were able to do was be the liaison for them. Like we tried our best to, share the resources with them, take the time to sit with them, to explain what was available to them, what their child, like how their day was, that might be a bit more like difficult. What are the ways that we found make it easier for the child to integrate into our regular classroom? Like we try to play that role that for other families in our school, they were able to access that information and those resources in other ways. We didn't assume that they knew even what the diagnosis meant. And so I remember sitting with our school psychologist and a parent and going through the diagnosis that from the psychologist that they brought to us. Even just getting a diagnosis, if you don't have the financial means to do so. So it was, sometimes they would say like going above and beyond. I mean, we didn't see it that way, but it was just taking the time to say like, what might be different for this family going through the same situation as some of our other families and trying to help.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd like to go to Carmen from the Gaspé.
Hi. My question is, we have a lot of new immigration for work reasons. And I was wondering if you had suggestions that we could use in terms of reaching families and making sure that they feel included and safe to come and speak to our school and feel included and comfortable.
Yeah, I think, so I'm assuming they're temporary stay?
No.
No. Okay, they're
Well,
permanent.
they're on long-term work visas.
Okay.
And we're a very rural area. Like we score a 10 on the Deprivation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And do they, yeah. Well, that's a great example, right? Of when I was talking about the different kinds of families. So for them, language barrier obviously is
Mhm.
huge. And is it the same, from the same cultural background, or is it a mix?
No, we have we have like Brazil, Peru, Puerto Rico. Like it's huge, the students that we've had come in so far.
Okay, so in that sense, to me, the number one barrier is language. And if we can get things translated right off the bat, then communication becomes easier, so that they get at least the information that they need. And again, reaching out to people, especially virtually, it's much easier now to look for, people who can translate. We used to translate our newsletters in Tamil, because at the time we had a large Sri Lankan population, as I'd mentioned. And so we were able to send newsletters, and it was a parent who would translate for us. And often when people immigrate, and I'll say that just from my personal experience with my, parents, grandparents, we tend to find people from our same cultural background. And so somebody who may have been here a little bit longer might have more experience, but being able to help them find a network to latch onto and to help them navigate the school system could be really, really beneficial.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that there's like a whole stream of chat talking about ways to engage parents in different ways, which is an interesting segue because Nancy has put together some questions around having kind of a breakout group discussion around some different techniques. So for people that want to get a head start on thinking about some of these solutions and strategies, you might want to take a look at the chat. But I'd like to just open the space for maybe one more
I love
question.
that. Sorry, I love
before
that
we kind
adopt a family.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's maybe take one more question before we transition into some breakout groups, and then we are going to come back together for a final discussion. Any last questions, comments? Okay, so Nancy, I'm going to invite you, if you don't mind putting up the questions that you put before. For those of you, you might want to have your camera ready, because Nancy added a QR code that will automatically go onto your phone. So you might want to look at that, but as well, we're also going to post the questions.
Yeah, so we thought, I thought we'd do an activity which requires us to use that equity lens. And because parental involvement, or lack of, as we often hear, is a recurring issue among school teams working in disadvantaged areas, I thought we'd use that as an example, because we know that it's not because they don't care. So let's think about this particular issue, but we can switch this out for other, using other examples as well. So you'll be divided in breakout rooms for the activity. We're asking that you individually answer the questions at first. Then you'll share your responses in your virtual rooms. And when we come back, we'll ask you either to share examples or just insights or anything you feel is worthwhile to share. So the questions, which can be downloaded by scanning that QR code, are to think about a school event in which parents or families were invited to participate, and then to answer, were all parents and families present at this event? And if yes, what factors do you think contributed to their participation? And if not, what factors might have contributed to some of the parents and families not being present? So, maybe it was the time of day, the day of the week, the way the event was communicated. Maybe it required babysitters, and just so what you think might have contributed. And then using an equity lens, and remembering that this advantage can be different from one community to another and one family to another. What factors could be considered when planning future events to ensure we're providing all of our families an opportunity to participate? So I would say maybe 3 to 5 ideas. And I'll give everybody a chance to scan that.
Sure. And so 2 things, a few things actually. So one is before Catherine puts us into breakouts, let's kind of silently do our some thinking and before we jump in. As well, I got a nice note from Eva at the Eastern Township School Board. They are able to be in the same room together. So Catherine, as if possible, like you don't need to put them in groups because they're literally in a breakout room together. And just to say, we're going to give you about 17 minutes, 17, 18 minutes. So, you know, it's a good amount of time, but do of course make sure everybody has a chance to share. So I'm going to be quiet for about 1 minute, and then I invite Catherine to add people to breakout rooms. Before we do that though, any questions for Nancy about this activity? I'll be quiet now. Hi everybody, welcome back from the. I would love a thumbs up, a thumbs to the side, or thumbs down to find out the length of the breakout room. Was it okay, or not long enough? Okay, that's good. Or how about too long? Was it too long? No, okay, it was okay. I've been getting feedback that sometimes breakout rooms too short. Okay, so welcome back. I hope you had discussion. I would love to have some comments. Anyone that had any aha moments, any insights into ways to engage parents in ways that may not be done already, or just any kind of insights or aha moments that came from the questions. Any volunteers to speak up and share? We're probably just going to take 3 or 4 comments.
One thing that came to my mind, we had a real stimulating conversation, and it was so nice to see the Quebec education representative with us in our group. And just what came to my mind is, you know, how we measure participation in activities as CDAs in our OMR journals. And then, you know, like there was a comment, I think by Emma, like sometimes does a parent just need information and maybe not to actually be in that workshop that night and virtually, but our CDAs and OMR and the PRT and how we chart statistics and evaluate impact, maybe do we need to look at that with an equity lens and maybe revisit that? That kind of came to mind, and you know what I mean? It's
great. Thank you, Brian. Kim F, I saw your real hand go up.
Old school, eh?
Yeah.
One thing that stuck out in my mind in our group was that we were talking about different ways to engage parents, and we talked a lot and came around to figuring out that basically if you put the relationship first, that's the way you're going to connect with people. You can have your events at different times. You can provide transportation. You can contact parents in different ways. But if you have that personal connection with your parents and your school community, with the families, then I think they're more apt to feel more comfortable and willing to participate and engage with you. You take that stress off them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. Lynn, Bruce.
Hi. We in our group, even though I'm in a rural school, and I had the 2 ladies with me were in Montreal region. We basically were dealing with our realities, even though our locations were different. We were dealing with the realities almost the same way. You know, in regards to, for example, let's say hot lunches or finances, whether it was through donations or it was just absorbed by the school or donations of clothing, things like that. we realized that even though we are from two major different realities, a lot of our, I guess, what's the word for it? Our ideas and the way we're handling these situations were very similar. You know, so.
Absolutely understood. I mean, I have so many things to say, but I'm gonna see. Is there any other comments or things people want to share? David P.
Yeah, actually, it was pretty much the opposite of what Lynn said for us too. Like, we're from different places and our realities were completely different. I was mentioning how for parent-teacher interview, because well, I mean, I was gonna say because we're in a rural area, but so is Jessica and Michael. But since the parents are coming from far away, the fact that they were able to have virtual meetings with the teachers increased the parents' participation, because they're like, well, I'm not going to drive 30-45 minutes to go talk to the teacher for 15 when I could just click on this button and then talk to the teacher in the comfort of my own home. But then both Michael and Jessica were saying, well, no, for us it was the opposite. And I thought that was really interesting. That was number one. And then when it came to, I shared an observation that I noticed too, is different platforms helps us interact with people differently. So if I would send an email, or if we'd send an email to a parent and they don't reply back, we're probably thinking, oh, this parent's not really interested. But we don't know the reality if they do have access to a computer at all times too, or if they get it on their phones, if they have data on their phone too. But you realize that if you use a different platform, you might get a more increase in parent participation. So I always thought it might be in our best interest to really ask the families, what is your preferred method of communication? And by putting the onus on them too, it's like, well, I prefer text message, I prefer like Facebook Messenger, I prefer WhatsApp, I prefer this and that. And then it might be a little bit more work for us as educators, but I think the return on investment is huge, because it's like, well, you just found out what their preferred method of communication is, so you're going to use that to increase the communication, because as Nancy mentioned and as the research suggests, you increase communications with parents, and there's a direct correlation with the student participation.
Absolutely. Great comments, David. Thank you. So we're going to start wrapping up in a few minutes. Nancy had highlighted a question in the chat that she wanted to answer. So Nancy, why don't you?
Yeah, somebody asked about how do we get the voice of the parents who aren't, for example, on our governing boards or PPO. I love that question, because it's a great example of like how we can shift our thinking, right? So we, in schools, like we do things because they've always been done. So we set up, PPO, governing board, and parents are expected to come to, first of all, know what it is, and then to come and sit, and maybe they don't even know what happens at PPO or governing board, but maybe we need to go to them and find out where they are. Again, if they're part of I don't know, some community organization, is a member from the school can go there and have conversations about their experience as parents in the school. And they don't necessarily formally need to be part of a PPO for us to get their opinion and their voice heard. That could lead to them coming into a more formal meeting, but it doesn't have to, because the goal would be, we want to hear their voice. And David was just saying, about like finding out what methods of communication. All of these things do take more work, as he said, but they're always worthwhile. Like the payback is always much bigger, and like the payoff is huge, and it just becomes worth it. And when we work in the areas that we work in, there's always somebody willing to do something that's not in our collective agreement. It's not maybe in our ways of doing, but it's the beauty of working in these wonderful communities. I briefly want to share, we ran a summer program for many years. It started in the Plateau, where it was community organization, 3 schools, and we ran it that way. It then transformed because our English schools closed in that area. We brought it to the school that I was working at, and the parents, you know, would drop off their kids, and in the morning it was kind of like traditional school, in the sense that they would drop them off, and we would just start with a wave. You know, like they would be at the door and we would wave. And slowly, by maybe day 3, we would somehow entice them in, because maybe we would stand at the door and chit chat. By the end of 2 weeks, parents were coming in. We had to say, okay, we need to start, because they felt more and more comfortable just coming and chatting about, you know, what they were doing in the morning while their kids were going to be at a summer program, or talking about the feedback that they were getting from their kids. One morning we were leaving for Granby Zoo, and a mom, grandmother, and aunt were dropping off, and I said, hey, do you want to join us? We have place on the bus. We have additional tickets. And they're like, really? And they came. We had the most fabulous day. Well, that connection to, we were 3 summer program teachers with those 3 women remained for years, because we spent the day at Granby Zoo together.
And Nancy, in like the last 2 minutes, basically, you know, when we first spoke, you know, a few weeks ago, you kind of told the story also about the summer school, which was like, you know, first part of the day, literacy activities, more traditional. And then the second day was like the summer camp experience. And I just loved hearing that as well.
Yeah, we wanted to give parents an opportunity that they didn't, like, that was easier for them in terms of childcare. So it was the morning, but, you know, our approach was one of non-traditional. So we're doing literacy activities in fun, engaging ways. We're doing project-based learning, and the kids are there for all sorts of different reasons. Having that really small ratio was really great for a lot of our kids. And our goal was, we're not helping them learn to read in 3 weeks. We're helping them to know that they can love learning, and that they have everything that they need to succeed. And school is, you know, and learning is just, it's fun. And then in the afternoon, we would integrate them into, at that time, it was Sun Youth's day camp. And it was amazing, because a lot of the kids, I mean, they were on a sliding scale, so it was great for our lower income families. And they remained part of the day camp, even long after our summer program ended. And so they got new community relations from that.
We're going to wrap it up in a second. It's just, I mean, seeing all these stories and suggestions going on in the chat really makes me appreciate, A, how great our CDAs are and the CLC network for doing this type of work. B, like the need to have this ongoing conversation. You know, in 1 minute, you know, for yourself at AMSFA, or contacting Nicole Julian, who works around disadvantaged rural communities. Can you just say where they can learn more about this, or be in contact, and why they might want to be in contact with you, or ways you can support them? To put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, you know, like I said, my mandate is primarily our schools, selected schools in the Montreal School for All on the island of Montreal. But Nicole and I have already spoken, and we're happy to collaborate. As I was saying earlier, like, our English community is small, right? And we're happy to collaborate and to help in any way that we can. And it's, I don't really have all of the answers. I care so much about this work, and I come at it with, you know, the hat of a teacher, but it's more than that. It's just making sure that, you know, we view everybody as part of the solution. And so any way that we can help, you can go to our website, you can be in touch with Nicole, you can be in touch with me directly, you know.
Great. And I just popped in the website again, if people want to learn more or get in contact. Okay, but okay, we're 1 minute late, so thank you everyone for everyone's patience. But I want to just take a second and thank Nancy so much for collaborating, for presenting with us, presenting to us. It was so wonderful, and I really hope CDAs and our partners appreciated this equity lens and this lens of disadvantaged families, and ways to make sure that they can be part of our school and communities to the greatest extent. So on behalf of the CLCs, I want to thank you so much, Nancy, and until next time.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
So we're doing a 15-minute break.